Can handle the east part of Mexico, and Idaho, Idaho will always be there because it's just got lots of potato.
Okay, our next presenter is Nathan Jackson with the Klamath Cattlemen's Association. Nathan.
What do red wine and potatoes have in common? They both go really well with a nice steak. Well, I just want to give you some information about the impacts of the cattle industry on the Klamath Basin, and it's going to be sort of, I'm not going to get as in-depth as either Sid or Willie did here, but I want to give you an overview of what we provide here in the basin and in the state overall. First of all, I want to talk about what cattle provide, and a lot of you have seen this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's not that funny. when we talk about what people need to survive and thrive, you have to start with the bottom before you can move up. And beef provides, as well as potatoes do, the very bottom tier of what's on this triangle here, which is what you physically need to live. You got to have food, and beef does that for you, as well as potatoes. What's in a cow? We all know there's meat in a cow. Here's a breakdown of some of the cuts that we have. We have muscle cuts, those are steaks and roasts. We have ground products, hamburgers, salami, deli meats, processed meats. Then we also have some specialty meats that are produced out of cattle, those being tongue, liver, sweetbreads. We don't eat a lot of those in this country. Sid was talking a lot about exports. We export a lot of that type of meat overseas. Believe it or not, that's kind of where the profit margin is for a packer, is getting that meat sent overseas. That's where they make the money off of the cow. A packer doesn't make very much money on a beef, about $20 a head. It's not real high margins. The other things that are in cattle, of course, are byproducts. Byproducts are important to a variety of edible and inedible products. They're used in industrial, pharmaceutical, food manufacturing, leather, and animal feed applications, with animal feed being the most significant use. Pet food is made with beef byproducts. Gummy candies, it's made with beef byproducts. All the gelatin that you eat comes from a cow. Pharmaceuticals, cortisone injections are made from beef byproducts. They also use beef to make biodegradable oils. And then, of course, leather. It's a pretty big chunk of that. Some of the more recent uses for beef byproducts include anti-rejection drugs, aroma chemicals for fragrances, and a variety of household products, arteries for transplants, food packaging, fat substitutes in the form of glycerin, pest control, organic fertilizers, and even PVC pipe. The economic contribution of the cattle industry to Klamath County, this will mirror a little bit of what Willie was talking about earlier, but we are the largest agricultural commodity in Klamath County and the largest agricultural commodity in Oregon, based on the value of cows and calves sold. Klamath County is the fourth largest county in Oregon for beef production, behind Malheur, Morrow, and Umatilla counties. We estimate that we have about 260,000 cattle in Klamath County at the height of the season. That doesn't match up to what you'll find for inventory numbers, because inventory is taken on January 1. When you look at the January 1 number, we have about 95,000 cattle in Klamath County because of the sort of reciprocal arrangement that we have with Northern California, where a good portion of our cattle go to California to spend the winter. And the direct value of the sale of cows and calves to the Klamath County economy, as Willie said, is about $150 million a year. The cattle industry represents about 5% of the economy of Klamath County. It's a pretty big chunk. When we talk about that in terms of the rest of the country, we're in the top 7% of cattle producing counties in the country. You know, what we're really good at in this country is making stuff. And whether that stuff is potatoes, or boards, or cows, that's what we do really, really well. One of the things that we have to get back to in this country is making stuff and then adding value to it. But the stuff is where you got to start. We'll talk a little bit now about the different production sectors for the cattle industry. Those would be the seed stock, cow-calf, feeders, and feedlots. See? For seed stock production, the major breeds that we see in Klamath County are Angus and Hereford. Other widely used breeds are Charolais, Simmental, and Limousin. And minor breeds that are still present here are Red Angus, Solares, Chianinas, Shorthorns, Gilpies, and a very little Brahman influence in this county. Cow-calf production is probably the largest sector that we have in this county. Most herds here are English cross cattle. English cross, of course, are those Angus and Hereford cattle that I talked about earlier. Bull selection is very important for quality improvements in the cattle herd. We try to match our production cycle with forage availability, and because of that, we have generally spring calving herds, and we sell our calves in the fall. These cow-calf herds run on marginally productive ground. It's rangelands, it's uplands, it's ground with steeper slopes, poor soils, a lot of non-irrigated ground is used for these cattle. As cattlemen, we're in the business of growing forage, and if it's grass or browse, that's what we grow. We just use cattle as a way to market that forage. One thing to remember about that cow-calf production is on those marginal lands that we are able to utilize, you can't do anything else with them. You can't farm them, you can't grow higher value crops on them because they just won't support it. That's why cattle production is very important for the utilization of that kind of ground. With feeder production, we have wean calves. Feed conversion is really important, especially for the feeder guys. That gets back to, with the cow-calf guys, that genetic improvement with the selection of bulls. And again, we want to match the production cycle with forage availability. The feeder sector here, the cattle arrive in the late spring or early summer. They stay on grass until the fall, at which time they get sold into a feedlot to be fattened and killed. This is generally a little more productive land that these feeder cattle run on. It would be irrigated pastures, some crop aftermath, but generally shorter growing season. The Wood River Valley has a lot of feeder production because it has really productive soils, but the growing season up there is so short that you can't grow potatoes on that ground. So we grow what we can on that ground, which is cattle. Cattle are able to utilize this poor ground and make something good out of it. And then the last sector that I want to talk about just a little bit is feedlot production. This is where those feeder calves go after they weigh 800 or 900 pounds. They're 16 to 18 months old. But to have a feedlot be viable, it has to be near a feed source. And we do have some potato waste in Klamath County that does get fed to some cattle, but generally we don't have enough feed source to have a real vibrant feedlot sector here. You have to be near corn. Up in the northeastern corner of the state, they can grow corn, they have feedlots up there. In Colorado, where they can grow corn, they have feedlots. In the Midwest, where they can grow corn, they have feedlots. We just don't have very much of that here in Klamath County. And then environmental impacts. You know, cattle can be bad for the environment if they're mismanaged. They can cause damage to pond and stream banks. They can introduce erosion and sediment loading to streams and nutrient loading as well. But all of these potentially adverse effects can be eliminated through proper management of cattle herd. Talk a little more about environmental impacts. Cattle can also be a tool for ecosystem restoration in the way of forage management. If you're doing work on a stream bank and you completely exclude use from a stream bank, does anybody here know what happens to that stream bank? Danny? It grows up into a big weed mess. The mice come into it, they tear it up, high water event comes along and it washes away your stream, and it's worse than if you've never done anything at all. Cattle can go in there, they help clean that ground up, and they keep it productive. Cattle are non-selective grazers, which means they don't pick and choose like a sheep or a goat or a deer does. They eat whatever's in front of them. They get the old dead stuff as well as the new stuff that's coming along. That also benefits wildlife because wildlife prefers that fresh, young growth. Cattle also, in the way of protecting wildlife, are pretty good at protecting baby antelope. Our range, in the springtime, we run right in the middle of an antelope calving ground, and we really protect a lot of little baby antelopes, and you have to be a little careful when you're riding out there on a horse because those little boogers will stay in the rocks right up until you're on top of them. You don't want to be riding too young a horse though. Additionally, the private lands that cattle run on support endangered species, and then the grass that they eat takes up nutrients out of the ground, and we turn that nutrient into meat, and we sell it in the grocery store and eat it. So finally, the cattle industry is vitally important to the Klamath Basin. We do provide the basic human needs that we have to survive. We contribute to the economic health of the region, and we contribute to the environmental health of the region. But the cattle industry is a legacy industry. We have deep social and cultural ties here, and it's a part of the fabric of the Klamath Basin. Thank you.
Nathan, what are the chances of getting a meat packing plant back in Klamath County?
Do you know somebody that's got a big pile of money they want to spend on a very marginal business that doesn't have any feedlot capacity around?
What about a mobile USDA?
You know, the Oregon Cattlemen's Association and the Klamath Cattlemen's Association has been trying to work with the inspection guidelines. We have the capability of state inspected meat being sold for consumption. Right now, we don't have any state inspection in Oregon. We're trying to get that reinstituted so that we can have a state inspected plant around here. I think there's one federally inspected plant. Is there a federally
In Oregon?
in the area?
Well, there's Masami.
Yeah, so Masami is federally inspected, but really as far as an individual producer trying to sell meat by the pound, there's not a way for that to happen right now in the Klamath Basin.
I don't know if people realize this or not, pasture lands, the irrigated pasture lands here in Klamath are the most productive pasture lands in the world. And the feeder portion that you refer to up there, the feed production on that can be equal or greater than what you'd see in a feedlot? Is that right?
In the Wood River Valley, it's not uncommon to see 3.5 to 4 pound a day gains on cattle. And that is feedlot quality gains. It just doesn't happen on grass.
Sid, can you tell me what you see as the barriers for your family having a successful future farming where you live? And also, can you share a little bit about the niche market, which is the community-supported agriculture that some of your family is doing?
Well, I think it's just like everyone in the room. The biggest barrier, especially in the potato, is fortunately it's one of the, if you lay it against, say, most of the big row crops or grains or alfalfa, potato does well as far as water use. That's surprising. It's one of the lower, but still water's the issue. And just as I mentioned, 2 big years in the fresh industry that really has detracted the acreage was the spikes of price that our growers in our basin weren't able to enjoy. And so the uncertainty of not knowing what to do. So, right now, you can see some of them, especially in the Malin area, but if you're traveling, those big, long, like if you go down toward Merrill, you see by Dan Chin's place, they're kind of a culvert building. Those are storage systems that were built recently. An estimated value right now of one of those buildings is close to 1.2 to 1.4 million just for the building. So if you don't have a supply and you don't know if you're going to have a crop, how do you make those type of investments? In the packaging side of things, we revamped, and all we needed to do is we needed a new bagging system, a little more economical, trying to get different variety of sizes. It probably saved us 6 employees, but it was a $1.2 million project. Not big money in the real world, but in our little world, it's huge. So those are things that I see as the biggest roadblock for the Klamath Basin, is just if we knew that, drought cycles and everything, when we don't have water, we don't go. I mean, it's just cut and dry. You can't go to another region and pick up that type of equipment and all your packaging and go to another region. About all we can do is we can go to a region and beg for supply and basically try to keep our accounts, but by doing so, it probably puts you in a worst case economically. Second part of that question, the CSA, it's a great experiment area. It's really my brother Marshall, who many of you know. His daughters had come back, and he was like, well, geez, your kids are all in 4-H. They don't want to raise a pig. They don't want to raise a steer. We're thinking about doing this. So we kind of supported that. And it's a small business. We don't look at it too in-depth economically, or we'd probably kick it out of the room. But it's really kind of a fun area to see the different. I never realized that we could grow all those different varieties of vegetables and stuff in our area. So, yeah, there's a potential that, the hope is that some point in time there could be a future market. And I think people are being drawn back to the local idea. Where's my food come from? And that's where, back to Nathan's part of the presentation is, with that ability of pasture land in this area, this is some of the most highly sought beef in the United States because of the grass-fed and different, and locally raised. So we're kind of in a unique area, and we're kind of at the forefront of the way the industry is starting to change. Now, if we could just work on a stable supply, in our case, it's water, and everybody has different issues, but that's kind of where we're coming from.
I understood you to say that cattle are actually good for riparian areas?
They can be, yes.
Well, they can be, because I'm no expert in the field, but I've heard that they're not, and that's what a lot of the fencing's about. So I was wondering if you could give what that fencing's about, what the argument is for keeping cattle out of riparian.
Well, if you don't manage the cattle in the riparian areas, they can be pretty destructive. If they camp there and tear the banks down, it's a bad deal. But if they're managed well, and the fence isn't for the sake of a fence, the fence is a management tool to manage that cow's access to that riparian area. A lot of times you can do the same amount of work with a watering system that they don't have to go to the stream. There's been some studies that have shown a 90% reduction in stream access by cattle just if you give them a trough somewhere else that they can go to. That's the problem. The most highly productive land that we have, though, is in that riparian area, and so that's why we use it. Our uplands in this county have, over the last 100 years, been degraded largely through the encroachment of juniper, and that area isn't available anymore for us to run cattle on because the juniper come in, they suck up the water, the grass doesn't grow, you can't put a cow there. They got to go somewhere, and that's what the trade-off has been.
Question for Willie. If an oilseed program was developed in the basin, strictly for fuel oil, like biodiesel or something like that, would that still fall into agricultural commodities? And along that same line is, if we process that fuel oil locally and use it locally, that would be a major multiplier, would it not?
Correct, and we are studying right now a number of different commodities looking for use, I guess, as alternative energy. Camelina, euphorbia are two that come to mind right now. We're looking at the alternative crops, and right now we're looking at establishment rates, and once we get that figured out, if they'll grow here in the basin, how much water do they need? Will they withstand freezes in the middle of the summer? The thing we're looking at, those studies have been going on last couple of years, is our total production. How much production can we get out of that in terms of the seed itself, and then processing that, distilling that down into an oil product. Right now, I'm an economist, so I've looked at a lot of alternative energy, and those that I've seen right now, and of course, fuel oil is going to drive how much of this we produce. But without the subsidies right now, it's not real profitable to go out there and grow that commodity as a fuel source. I think that'll probably change in time as we transfer out of petroleum products. But we are studying those, and you're right, we would have a significant multiplier if we can grow it here, if we can crush it here, and we can utilize it here. Plus, it also gives us something else to export, bring those dollars in.
I have a question, just a brief comment on the riparian grazing. I have some riparian area that I do exclude from cattle, but I have more that I use as riparian pasture. And I use fence to, as Nathan pointed out, as a tool to manage my livestock. And I flash graze certain times of the year, depending upon what the year's like. And every year is different. So my management of my herd changes every year. But riparian pasture management is very important, and cattle are a great tool to use to enhance that riparian growth. On another matter, you've all kind of touched on it a little bit, but Willie and Nathan, can you touch a little bit more on our infrastructures? And what happens to our infrastructures when we have a regulatory drought where the federal government intentionally restricts our access to our water property? I'm talking about infrastructure such as the historical use and the relationships and whatnot. Can you touch on that a little bit?
I'll wait and see what you say.
Well, I think Marshall actually, or Sid, Marshall, Sid, you guys look exactly the same. Talked about it pretty well, really. If we don't have a water supply that we can count on, it makes it really hard to be able to plan for what you do. As far as infrastructure for the cattle industry, we have an auction market here in Klamath Falls. If there aren't any cattle in Klamath Falls, that auction market goes away. The trucking industry that comes in and out of Klamath Falls with cattle is pretty vibrant right now. And, you know, I talked about this relationship that we have with Northern California, where these cattle ride on a truck from Klamath County to the northern Sacramento Valley, and that's a big deal. And if we don't have a consistent flow of those cattle coming through here, it's hard to find a truck to put a cow on. Because there will still be cattle in the area, but if there aren't enough of them, then trying to find a ride for them gets to be difficult. Trying to get buyers to come and look at your cattle. If you know, we are a cattle area. I grew up in Douglas County, and there are some cattle in Douglas County, but nowhere near the numbers that there are in Klamath County. And trying to get somebody to come and look at your calves to buy them can be a problem, just because there isn't that volume that makes it reasonable for people to come and look. So there are definitely some infrastructure concerns if the total volume of the production goes down, you know, that infrastructure goes away with it.
One of the things that I didn't touch on when we looked at the model was talking more about employment, but if you take our gross sales, not the multiplied sales, but just our gross sales, in agriculture we generate 9 direct jobs and 6 indirect and induced jobs for every $1 million. So for every $1 million in gross farm gate sales that we have, we create 15 jobs in Klamath County. So when you start looking at infrastructure, when you start looking at some of the numbers that Sid had up there, in the impact, if you lose a shed, you not only lose the farmer, which may be 1 or 2 families, but you lose the 50 families that also derive their income from working in that packing shed. So then the local businesses where the farmer purchased goods and services, where those employees purchased goods and services, now don't have that many people shopping in their stores. That's that multiplier effect. That's how that trickles down in the economy. And so when you look at Klamath County, and I mentioned that it was a hub for the outlying areas, and that's because, you know, Lakeview, Lake County doesn't have the agriculture that we have, and it can't support 3 different tractor dealerships that we have here. It can't support its own fertilizer, pesticide dealerships, so they have to shop over here. So we're really looking at economies of size and scale. With our agriculture being 5th largest in the state, we've got those things because it's all of us put together. But if you start pulling, you know, 1 or 2 out at a time, pretty soon there's just not going to be that mass that's going to be able to support multiple businesses. And so you're going to see that trickle down effect, if that's what you're getting to on infrastructure. The other part that I think about is being able to put capital investment. When I gave Danette $200, you know, she's got to be able to make a profit so that she can reinvest into that capital. You know, you got to buy new pickups, you got to buy new tractors, you got to stay efficient. If you're going to produce 500 sacks to the acre on potatoes, you're not going to do that with the same equipment you were farming with in 1948. You know, Sid mentioned the $1.5 million shed that you're going to have to store potatoes in. Those are expenses that you're going to have to generate payments for every year.
This question is for Willie. One of the things that we often discuss at OIT, especially in the renewable energy program, is the idea that we have, you know, that energy prices are going to go higher and we're going to have a sustained period in the future of considerably higher energy prices than we do today. I'm just curious as to what you think the impact of that would be on the basin agriculture. How would it be different here perhaps than in other regions that are closer to population centers?
I guess that's a tough one for me. The first thing that comes to mind, and I look at the corn situation now, is we're trading what we're growing on Maslow's bottom rung there in terms of using our resources to grow food, to converting and changing our resources to grow energy. So that's the first trade-off I think that's out there and has to be addressed. The other one is can we take in our rotation with our food crops, have these energy crops? I think that's why we're looking at them, is to determine, you know, can they be grown here? Are they profitable to be grown here? And can we utilize it here? You know, there's a big movement right now from farm to fork. That goes with the CSAs is, you know, if we can grow more food and eat more of that locally, our multiplier goes up. We can do the same thing with energy. To me, it's almost like we're going backwards where we were 80, 90 years ago, before we took all the farmers off the farms and moved them into urban areas and into the Industrial Revolution to work in manufacturing plants. We're kind of going back to where we're eating locally. And there's I guess a social aspect of that because I know Sid, that his potatoes will be better for me. And I know he's producing them just like the guy in Idaho, but I know Sid. So there's that social interaction, just that trust factor that's there. And I guess the third thing I'd like to say that, you know, we talk an awful lot about exporting goods out of here in terms of agricultural commodity. Probably the next biggest thing that we export out of Klamath County is kids. Quality kids off of these farms and ranches. The profitability is not there. The excitement's not there to be a farmer or rancher, and we're exporting them out of this community.
Yeah, they stop at OIT first on their way out.
Right.
Just a quick add on that is, you know, where renewables are is, this is the first time I'm really seeing a serious side down in our basin of looking at, you know, the solar aspect for powering these plants. And we're really looking at it ourselves, but a neighbor down in Malin just put up a solar panel that they're going to power their whole plant pack, you know. It's more, I call it a packaging plant, but really it's just a processing plant where they prepare it and then they can go either export or down to Frito. But, you know, the reason I said, what was your motivation? It was said, you know, major corporations, being Frito-Lay, that's owned by PepsiCo, that have passed these sustainability studies, and they want to go green, and they want to go. And again, these are aspects that we're going to see more and more of. You know, if you guys can come up with a pump that would, you know, solar that would pump a power 50 to 70 horse pumps, we'll come sit in your class and learn all about it. Because, you know, my energy bill, you know, back when we had the favorable rate, I could go out and it was roughly for a grain crop was $5 an acre, and it was that way for that 50-year period. So we could plan, and what it did is it really protected us in the downtime. Down in California now that we're paying tier rate, Oregon is quickly going to be there. We're going to be looking at our costs this year. We're going to drop one irrigation back, so we're going to probably give 75% of that necessary amount, and we're still looking at $85 an acre. That was a profit, you know. Or sometimes it was less of the loss. So when grain markets will cycle, when they go back down to 130, you know, that's when our little economic world's going to tip over, and that's why everybody's trying to go, what are we going to do about power? Because, you know, water's the threat, but on the other side, power's a monster that's just eating everybody's tail off, especially down in the high irrigated ag part of the county.
I forgot your name in the orchard.
Willie.
Willie, I knew that. Have you, being an economist, have you run the numbers? I know in the OFF project, we're looking at drawing up due to adjudication in 2012 between 30 and 50,000 acres. Huh? Okay, 18,000 acres. Have you done any numbers about, and I don't know what it is, for if there's anything in the project that has junior water rights, but.
I haven't looked at any of I haven't taken a subset of any of the data to look at on project, off project, to see what the economic impacts are. I guess from where I sit in the education arena is I'd like to know what's going on. Once the decisions are made, then I can go in there and I can help calculate some of those numbers. But right now it's, you know, I could throw out numbers, but I don't have anything to base it on. I need to know what, if we're gonna dry up ground, what was the production capacity of that ground? How many pounds per acre of dry matter that I could convert into pounds of beef? Yeah, we can do those kind of numbers once we identify the piece of ground and have some kind of understanding of exactly what we're dealing with. If I did it right now, I'd sell you some beachfront property. It's just, I'm just shooting into the wind. But one way we can do it is by taking the data that we do have and decreasing it by 5 or 10% and tracking it that way. That might be one way to look at it. But I think it's important that when we make those measurements, again, we've got to look at the net farm income to the individuals on those properties, but then we also need to look at what that trickle-down effect is to the community, because I guarantee you, no matter what happens on or off project, we all still buy our tractors at the same place and our groceries at the same place, so there's going to be that impact there. And so we've got to capture that as well. So the answer to your questions, no, I haven't broke it out and just looked at the individual sections yet.
But you could guesstimate 10-15% off the...
And I don't even know what the percentage is going to be yet. If somebody can help identify what those numbers are, then we can get there.
I'm going to comment on this really briefly. I think we won't have a really good idea about that until the adjudication is complete, which is we're not there yet. So we wouldn't know how many acres potentially could be idled and out of production depending on an adjudication outcome or a settlement outcome. That may not make any sense to anybody in here, but does that make sense, Willie? Once the adjudication is done, then you begin to understand how the water is divided. And then reality of water calls would show what's happening with the water. Or people could settle those issues ahead of time and have a more sure, reliable water source, which is what the project irrigators have already done. But up in the off project, that's not complete. Does that make sense? No, probably not. Okay, I had one question.
The better the data we have to work from, the more we can accurately determine what the economic impacts are.
Yeah. So my question is, when, Willie, you have talked about the regional economy and how but it's wood products and manufacturing that are number one in the regional economy, right? And ag is number two.
Yeah, if you want to look at it from a production standpoint, in the data, again, I'm referring to is 2007. It's a city-county data produced online, and if you look at that data, wood manufacturing gross direct was about $592 million, but then behind that falls some of the retail sector, but I discount the retail sector because that's respending. Those aren't new dollars generated. I'd count that as a service sector. So it would be wood products, retail, and then agriculture.
So we have a beautiful basin, and we have some tourism happening here. Just for my mind, where does tourism fall?
I would have to pull that slide up again and show you what the multiplier effect is from tourism. And you capture that in eating, drinking, establishments. And my question then you start looking at macroeconomics and what happens in times of recessions. People that are vacationing and doing tourism have a limited amount of money that they're going to spend on recreational activities. So why we do have Crater Lake and why we are a beautiful spot, are we going to be the destination, or is the Grand Canyon or one of the oceans going to be the destination? And so through the model, we can take and determine, if I want to replace X number of dollars of agriculture, how many tourists do I need to have on an annual basis to replace that? And we can determine that through looking at the in-plan model, give you an idea.
Yeah, this is Rodney Todd. As I understand from the presentation, he was here in 1870 to
That was the 1970s. President Obama gave a speech today outlining future energy policy, and one of his key elements was natural gas. We are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, is one of the buzz phrases you'll hear. We have more than 50 years equivalent of Saudi Arabian oil and natural gas that we're underutilizing right now. If you've been reading the papers, we're now the hub of natural gas distribution in the western states with the facility at Malin, and yet it's poorly distributed other than in the urban areas of Klamath Falls. I would suggest, having done the math, that even without a subsidy, nat gas has become an energy source for a lot of our agricultural production and processing activities if we could get the infrastructure to distribute it here. Is anybody working on that? I love solar panels, they're really cute. You know, if you don't have any other source, great, but if you really want some energy at a cheap price, nat gas.
Coming from the southwest, Rod, most of our irrigation pumps ran on natural gas. We had the distribution lines ran right up to the field, and we used 400s, 454s, inline 6s, and those ran all of our irrigation pumps.
We used to run, well, I remember seeing Sid out of the ditch bank 40 years ago, and he was a little younger than me, but 549 Internationals, and we ran them on propane. Well, propane is way more expensive than natural gas. It's portable and so forth. You don't need the infrastructure, but you know, the raw product, it's much lower density. It takes a different kind of infrastructure, but they don't market them here, but you can buy a Honda car now. They're widely distributed in India, but you can buy a Honda car here in the United States if you get on the dealer's list that will run off the nat gas from the pipe next to your furnace in your garage with a little black box that compresses the fuel overnight. It takes a 3,000 PSI cylinder to hold liquefied natural gas, but I mean, it's old technology. We're just suddenly at the hub of a wealth of energy if you look at nat gas.
Hey, second part of your question is nobody that I know of at Oregon State. Is Tom or anybody at OIT working on nat gas?
You know, just briefly, the nat gas, you know, Basic America that ran that facility, that was basically off the gas. That was the last nat gas project. They closed that line down, being that it was in California. Wilma's son, Bill Heine, for his mint still, he located it on the California side, and right across the street, you know, they basically, a year ago, he had to pick up all of his business and relocate it into Oregon because of Avista wouldn't drop that line and service that line. So we're really in a roadblock, and it's just, we do need to look at that, because with that hub in the area, and also all the east side of the basin, you know, back into Nathan's area and all this, you know, that energy is right there underneath us, and we're not utilizing it one iota. I think Bill Heine is the only business that I know of in the lower basin that's using nat gas, and he told me his still price versus what we were charged on a diesel production still. It's impressive. I mean, it's something we have to look at.
Super cheap, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of us know about T. Boone Pickens, and he has a big campaign for natural gas and wind power and so forth. And apparently you can convert a diesel, our diesel fleet is his first piece of work that he'd like to get done, and you can change a diesel engine in a freight truck over to using natural gas. Yeah, I'm sure if anybody contacted, boy, I'd hate to see what some of those drilling would do to our volcanic springs and something, I don't know. But I'm sure that some of these companies would be more than willing to do it.
I just had a quick comment on the tourism question. We looked at this I'm on the board of Discover Klamath, and so we've taken a look at this recently, and the figures that our executive director got from Jim Chatterton shows that we do have a considerable increase in tourism over the last 20 years. It's gone from about 1.9% to about 11% in terms of economic activity in the county. Now, there's the one problem with that statistic is that's hospitality industry, and so that's restaurants and lodging, and unfortunately the statistics we have doesn't separate the lodging out from the hospitality part, and so it's the one interesting thing we found with that is in terms of employment that because those are relatively low-wage jobs, it actually accounts for close to 20% of employment. So they're, like I said, but unfortunately they're relatively low-wage jobs, particularly in the restaurant industry. So it's not up there with these other jobs, and I think that's it's certainly a growing part of the economy, but it's not something, from what we can tell, it's not something that's going to replace the agricultural industry. The other thing that we'd really like to see is to develop more tourism that's related to the agricultural economy, more agritourism that fits in with the sort of larger geotourism and ecotourism kinds of things that we're working on.
I agree. I think there's lots of room for agritourism. It takes a special kind of person, though, to work with those people when they come onto a private farm or ranch. And I'm sure you guys recognize that most farmers and ranchers are pretty independent type sorts, and not that they have an opinion, but sometimes they do. But I do want to touch on and make sure I'm pretty clear that I'm not against tourism. Let's go back to our in-plan model, and I mentioned that there was 400 lines in that, 400 sectors. Those communities, the more sectors that you have, the better off your community is going to be, because you have more opportunities to spend that money and re-spend that money locally. I spent 10 years in a community that only had about 3 business sectors. That was all leakage. We didn't have much of a multiplier effect. All of our money was exported, along with our goods and services, along with our kids. So the more sectors that we can have in the community, the stronger the community is going to be, whether it's tourism. And that's where I think we need to look at in working with economic development. I've talked to everybody, and I look at my job as part of economic development is keeping existing businesses thriving. And for me, I focus on agriculture. And then for you guys, with the other economic development people within the county, to help add more businesses that are complementary to what exists here right now, or what's missing through our leakage. So we gotta expand. We gotta keep bringing something in here. Gotta import dollars, not export them.
Has anybody got just that one last question they're absolutely dying to ask? We have somebody in the back here who didn't ask. And this will be our last question.
This is the third public meeting I've attended in the last month. I keep thinking I'm going to an educational meeting about KBRA. And although I've enjoyed this one very much, I already knew everything that was said here tonight because I've been a farmer all my life and lived here and knew the Wood River. We fussed over that with the environment, to make it better, and then we don't even hear if it's better now or worse, but it was a big fuss, and they bought the Barnett Ranch, was it, in Aspen Lake, and I've forgotten. It's been so many years of so many things here. What I'm trying to say is we are very stressed by governmental agencies regulating us. The DEQ and the ESA, and now KBRA. It's very thick, and I don't understand it very well. But I have one page that I'd like to read, one small paragraph to you, and I brought copies of it out on the table. This is page 165, and it's a good night to do it because you've been talking economics. Now listen to this. 165 of the KBRA says, Klamath County agrees not to file a claim in federal or state court or before any administrative agency against the state of Oregon, the state of California, any state agency, department, division, or subdivision thereof, or the United States, arising from any decrease in property tax revenue or alleged business or economic losses, including property values due to facility removal. That's rather strong towards against the constitutional eminent domain clause. And it concerns me very much, and I'm still going to go to more public meetings, hoping to hear more about KBRA. And I know that our government is, broke and going to shut down, but I guess they're not going to quit spending money. So maybe someone will tell me how KBRA eventually, and the whatever it is, hydroelectric dam system, how this is all going to work. How is the government going to pay us in any way if they're broke? And I can't quite understand it. Thank you.
I believe the request I had was to come talk about the ag economics, so I'm not going to talk about KBRA. That's not a document that I've read all the way through, so I do know the ag economics of the county, but I don't know the KBRA stuff. So that's why I spoke on ag economics.
And part of what we're trying to do is to break everything down into components so folks do understand what the agriculture community contributes to reliability, how important water is, and how important hydroelectric is, what's going on there. And so that's what we're doing, is we're breaking it down into programs so people can look at it and understand. So that brings me to what I would call, it's the witching hour. It's time for us to conclude. If you would like to visit with some of the other part of the panelists, I'd like to thank Willie and Nathan and Sid, and particularly referee Chip for helping moderate tonight. I have a couple of announcements. Well, let's give our panelists. The series continues. On April 20th, same venue, same time, we're going to be talking about, we'll start talking about some of the other components. And the program is Schwarm, Salmon, and Dinner, Fish as a Commodity, Culture, and Ecology. So if you have want more information about that, go to our website and ask, or contact the folks at Prosper, and we'll have that conversation. It should be a real interesting evening. Also, a couple of other announcements. Since I'm an irrigator of the water users, the Klamath Water Users Association is having its annual meeting tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, at OIT there in the Commons. Everybody is welcome to come, and there'll be some questions that you can ask at that night, because we're going to have a program where we have the regional director from the Bureau of Reclamation and the regional director from Fish and Wildlife Service will be there, plus the local area manager for reclamation. If you want to ask water questions, that'll be a good place to come and ask water questions. With that, thank you for all coming on this wonderful spring, thank God it's spring, evening. And we'll hope to see you on April 20th, 7 o'clock, and we'll talk about fish.